Okay, good morning. It's Thursday morning, April 30th, and welcome to our second series of webinars on identity and access management, challenges and innovations. And we have a special guest today again. So last week we started off with Alex Laurie from Fortrock, indicating some of the up and coming activities in relation to identity and access management, how it's useful and how it's actually been progressing towards also much more customer centric and utilizing artificial intelligence, a webinar that can still be looked at on the website. Today we'll continue with another interesting perspective by Sven Pauwels from PwC on the rat race to modern IAM. In preparation of these sessions, we had quite a number of discussions on the different types of topics that we would like to address. And so upcoming will be things like cloud security management, zero knowledge proof, different forms of authentication, and how also different forms of authorization will happen. One of the specific topics that was addressed is how organizations that currently have an Active Directory, LDAP, whatever type of environment, are trying to migrate to the new forms of identity and access management, and how in any case this can be supported with new types of technologies. So before that, just a couple of words about LSEC. We are a non-for-profit association, been around for about 2 decades. And what we do is we try to be what we call a digital security catalyst, bringing together experts from the industry, providers, technology solutions, and innovators from the research with a number of end users from different financial, retail, critical infrastructure, healthcare, and other different vertical domains. We try to understand better their challenges and try in this way to come up with some ideas and solutions on how to address them together then with the industry, the different providers that are considering new technologies and solutions. We provide also different types of training activities like the CCSK. Last year we did a couple of those, this year again. And we work regularly on benchmarking, investigating what the developments are in the market, for instance, in terms of cybersecurity, with cybersecurity industry market analysis reports, or specifically on the industry of manufacturing and how cybersecurity is influencing that space. We work in that regards on a number of projects, international projects with European partners. For instance, in this case, on the cybersecurity for robotics. But we also have a number of projects on the support for innovative developments within companies in terms of their transformation towards digital in manufacturing. And we do investigations in cybercrime on international platforms to support law enforcement. Not so long ago, we launched the initiative together with a number of companies on We Help Our Hospitals, supporting the hospitals here in Belgium under the current COVID situation. And that's also the reason why we started up these sessions of webinars, is to help companies and to help our communities in be better equipped and better understanding what the challenges and upcoming opportunities are in the different domains of cybersecurity, including also identity, which is to us one of the core foundations of good cybersecurity. And as you can see, we have already scheduled a number of interesting talks and seminars and webinars. So for the next coming weeks, we'll be having a number of those. Next week specifically, we'll be talking together with Wartuchan from Scale Access about consumer identities in terms of authorization management. So stay tuned for that. For now, I'm going to hand over the word to Sven, who has prepared for us an interesting perspective on the developments and in this case, the rat race towards the modern IAM. Sven, the floor is going to be yours for the next half an hour at least.
At least half an hour. I'll be able to fill up in half an hour. Okay, thank you, Ulrich, for the introduction. Let's see if I can share my screen properly. Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. My name is Sven Pauwels, and At PwC, I'm the leader for anything that has to do with identity and access management and related technologies. I'm not going to talk a lot about myself. Is that not that interesting? The only thing that might be interesting is that I'm working on identity and access management related stuff for about 15 years now. So I've been around, and that might be interesting because I've seen a lot of things go well. I've seen a lot of things go bad. And we sort of have a feeling of why that is and how we can prevent the IAM projects from going bad. And basically that was one of the incentives when Ulrich asked me to do a presentation. I needed to find a topic, and the first thing that came to mind was the evolution of identity and access management over the last 10 years, more or less. We've seen a lot of stuff happen. And if I think about when I started off, identity and access management was mainly about provisioning and making sure that you could get a user to have a proper account in a system. And then there was a new trend that was group management, which was amazing. You could actually provision a group from an identity management system. But if you look at where we are now and how all those products have evolved, that's basically one of the reasons why I'm doing this pitch today. So what do I mean with the rat race to modern IAM? Modern IAM is where we are now with the products. And as I said, to be successful in IAM, you need to be aware of stuff that's important. And I've managed to put it all into one sentence. It is, I like to use quotes once in a while during presentations. You'll see a lot of quotes popping up. But to be successful in IAM, you need to know your exact needs, obviously, specific requirements you have related to your environment, and relevant legislation. And then you need to be able to provide a pragmatic approach to delivering a future-proof solution to an ever-changing problem. A large sentence, and it sort of holds everything you need to do to be successful in IAM. But what is the rat race to modern IAM? If you look at your organization, typically it's not the same as it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. They evolve, organizations evolve, the environment you're working in evolves, which means that whenever you build a system that's meant to support you in your work, that system needs to evolve at the same speed and pace your organization is evolving. IAM is one of those systems. It supports the optimization of giving access to your users to the correct data and functionality on that data. So it needs to be able to cope with transitions in the company, reorganizations, mergers and acquisitions, stuff like that, but also changing legislation, changing need or risk appetite. It's all involved in how your organization grows and how it evolves through time. Next to that, you also have the products that are evolving, and vendors are doing their very best to find new technologies or new ways of looking at the problem at the same problem, and they have new capabilities, and they try to compete with each other based on the one hand on quality, but on the other hand on functionalities, on new functionalities. Next to that, you have confusing messaging. Everybody has something to say about identity and access management. And if you look at who's saying what, there's a lot of different messages related to the same thing, but meaning different things. It can be quite confusing. At the same time, you in your organization know that you need to have identity and access management. You need to have more capabilities because legislation is changing, because, for instance, GDPR came up, and you needed to be more aware of who did what, when, and where, and who approved it. But there can be a gap between what you want to do, because you want to have the most modern identity and access management environment you could have, and the nature of your environment. I've talked to a lot of companies, and for instance, we had a large insurance company, and they were told by a vendor that they should move towards a centralized identity store, and the IT manager had his hands in his hair saying, there's no way in hell that I can move the landscape I have of identity stores into just one within 10 or 20 years. We had a look at it, and he was actually right. Unfortunately, that was quite difficult. On the other hand, you can buy the most advanced identity and access management solution, but if you then go to your IT department and you want to integrate, and they reply, well, we can do a connector based on a batch job, and how would you like to have the CSV file encoded? Then you know you're in trouble. So the gap between what you want to do and what you're capable of doing based on the landscape you have in your IT environment might be another problem. Then you have fierce competition of the vendors. So they try to stick out by either marketing messages that claim to do stuff that they are not really capable of doing, or by having the most advanced systems. But then the question is, would you be able to use whatever they offer? For integrators, it's the same thing. Integrators are also in that landscape trying to sell you projects, trying to be the one that wins most of them because they need to keep their people working. So organizations are typically struggling to make sense out of all the information available and their goal to reach modern IAM in their environment. So who's typically involved? The vendors, and they would have a focus on selling licenses and subscriptions. They want to be market leaders, and also on technology-wise, yeah. Not really just the dollars, but also the best product. Integrators, well, they need to sell mandates, basically. That's the pressure they have, and they're more or less caught in the middle of vendors and customers, because on the one hand, they know what the customer needs, they know what the vendor wants to sell, and they need to be able to sort of mix the two together into a working solution. Keeping in mind that their focus is still on selling mandates, so they're not necessarily focused on giving the customer the solution he would actually need. And then organizations who should be aware of this, anybody. If you're starting IAM, if you're implementing a program and are halfway through the process or in the middle of running your first, or you have already gone through a lot of projects and are actually running your IAM program, because don't forget, IAM is not really something that you would implement and then it's over with. It's continuously evolving. It's actually something you go in for a lifetime, or your company's lifetime. So if you look at identity management, maybe a short way to describe how we look at it. So identity and access management is a security discipline, basically. And it's the thing we need to do, or we want to do, is to make sure that the right individuals have access to the right resources for the right reasons at the right time, and that we are able to prove that they had this access and it was approved by somebody, and that there's a complete trace of all those steps in that chain. There's some key areas that we see for the moment. Workforce identity has been around for a long time, and it still is. Basically, what we try to do there is reduce time to service, so make sure that everybody has the correct access at the correct time when they start off, for instance, onboarding of new users. If it's done automatically, it's probably faster than we do it with a paper flow. Increase cost efficiency, increase security. Typically, you want to have every user to have only those accesses you would need, so the minimal set of accesses. If you're not automating that, then it's probably not that user-friendly to do it on paper and then limit the number of accesses. And what you see that companies that have a paper flow would resort to giving more accesses than actually needed. You want to protect intellectual property, prevent fraud, go into segregation of duty management, and you want to basically also improve your compliance posture. Privileged identity is typically something that's coming up stronger and stronger. Everybody should actually be looking at it. It's to assure confidence in business practices. You want to protect it against insider threats. Anybody that has privileged access can do a lot of stuff, sometimes even without being noticed, if you don't have the proper logging or log management available. You want to increase your security, you protect your assets, reduce IT costs, and basically you want to manage all those privileged accounts that are floating around typically when a system like this is not available. Consumer and customer or citizen identity is also an area that's very hot. Basically, we've seen a lot of systems that started off from marketing perspective, and then moved into, well, maybe we would also like to authenticate those users, and then they moved into a complete consumer and customer identity management setup. An identity of things, the last one, is typically something that's arising, and that puts some pressure on scalability of the identity and access management solutions. So what are some compelling reasons that we see for IAM? And this is not exhaustive, and the top part of the slide is a typical slightly PwC inspired disclaimer, so it's non-exhaustive, but I guess you understood that. It's to improve user productivity, make sure that they have the right entitlements faster so that they're able to do what they need to do. That would improve the user satisfaction because they're able to do their work without being hassled, that they don't have the right accesses and so on, less frustration. You want to augment your security, you want to manage your compliance, and you want to improve your operational efficiency. Those are the typical reasons, and again, there's much more reasons for IAM than these, but these are the typical ones we see with customers. And then we look at the challenges they want to solve. Again, disclaimer, this is non-exhaustive, so don't worry, it's not going to be too long, but control user behavior, for instance, manage privileged accounts, deal with regulatory compliance, deal with mergers and acquisitions. There's a lot of stuff IAM related, and basically, why is this important in my discourse about the rat race to modern IAM? From a customer perspective, or an organization's perspective, if you look at IAM, there's a good reason why you want to do it. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, there's a lot of product, a lot of promise, a lot of integrators, and you need to find the correct mix of an integrator and a product set to be able to solve your product or your problem. But since there's a huge diversity in problems and problem descriptions, there should also be a huge diversity in mixes of product and integrator to solve the problem. And the question now is, through all those marketing messages, through all those new product developments, and through all those integrator promises, how can you find, as a customer, the correct set that fits your needs? And that's basically what the rat race is all about. So what do we need to take into account? You hardly ever start from scratch. So that there are some companies around that start from scratch, and they're lucky because it's slightly easier, slightly. But typically you have to take into account that there's existing IT, there's a legacy landscape, and there might be some legacy IAM stuff around, because a lot of companies have moved into IAM by having some typical issues like, for instance, we need to make sure that any account we create, the account name is unique. So they started building lists with account names to be able to check against that, and all within their manual processes. And that would be, you could think about growing those types of systems into full-blown identity management environments. And we actually have clients that are doing that. You have your ever-changing environment. I already mentioned that. Your IT changes, you have newer versions of product, you have newer versions or new needs, new products that come in, your company structure changes, legislation changes, the threats change, because also very important, there's a lot of threat around, and the threat landscape also changes, your capabilities in IAM, they change, and the company's risk appetite can change. It's a program and not a project. If you start thinking about IAM, you know where you start, but you never know where you end. Because typically the IAM environment will need to move along with your company. It needs to evolve, it needs to grow, it needs to change. So how difficult can it be? That's a good question. I like this quote from Voltaire: doubt is an uncomfortable condition, but certainty is a ridiculous one. Basically, the thing I want to bring across is that you're never sure that what you're doing is the correct thing.
Sven, I never saw you or thought of you as an enlightened person.
Still, I still manage to amaze some people. Look at that. So already talked about the different perspectives that you have, but I wanted to highlight them again. From the customer's perspective, the biggest questions are, what are my needs and who should I turn to? And that's where the doubt lies for a customer. They want to solve their problem, and they typically have to stay within a budget, which is obvious. For a vendor, basically what we see is most of them are evolving and on a capability drive. So they want to have more capabilities and stand out by being able to offer more functionalities and newer functionalities and more modern functionalities. They still are they have a product focus. So you notice that in the way they market and they message. And their focus is on selling licenses or subscriptions. Basically, that's what drives them. That's what they're all about. For integrators, one of the difficulties is the difference between technology or technical focus, being able to implement and get it working, versus solution focus, build something that actually solves the problem the customer has. They're in the middle of, stuck in the middle between what the customer wants and what the vendor offers, and they need to find a way to build a solution based on that. And their focus is basically on selling man-days. And this sort of, you need to find a balance between the three of those. And it's a difficult balance to find. And basically, this is what makes the rat race happen. Now, there are some areas of concern if you have a bad approach, and these are all based on what we've seen the last 12 to 15 years. An IAM program, if it's pure technology driven and led by a technology group, and business is not involved, then it's probably going to either be a very technical implementation that's not really a solution to the actual problem, but more automation based and probably seen as too expensive for what it offers. You see that IAM, and I typically would compare an IAM implementation, specifically identity management for that matter, with implementing an ERP system. It touches every layer of your organization. And that's actually also one of the difficulties, because processes you want to automate within identity management might span across multiple business units or functional areas, and they might have other priorities or objectives or agendas. And if all of that is not aligned, you're also heading for disaster. The enterprise nature, I already mentioned that. You need to be aware of what makes your company tick, what makes your organization tick, and make sure that whatever you want to automate and the way you want to automate, the processes you put behind it, that they are in line with the nature of your enterprise. Because otherwise, again, it will not work, will not be adopted properly, and then you've built something that is doomed to be dismissed sooner or later. The prioritization criteria, that's also very important. So if you look at what you want to do with IAM, you sort of define all your requirements, or you know what you want to do in requirement based. Then you need to prioritize. You cannot do everything at once. Of this slide I used when I teach about this at the University of Antwerp, and they basically, I have an elephant, and the question is, how do you eat an elephant? It's bite per bite. So you have to prioritize, And you have to make sure that everybody that's involved, all the stakeholders, are agreeing on how you're going to choose what to do first. Otherwise, again, you get into arguments, you head into discussions, and you will never get to actually doing something or getting to the first step. The boil the ocean scoping approach, again, it's like eating the elephant, where you get big losses versus periodic wins. You need to make sure that you can prove to whomever, because you're going to ask for large budgets to do this. So you need to make sure that you're able to show actual progress, that you're able to prove that you're doing something worthwhile. Because otherwise, sooner or later, halfway through, you lose the budget or you lose the money you need. IAM fatigue, again, if you're doing projects, little steps, but it's not integrated in a big program, and you do not communicate well about it, then it's sort of like a hobby, and they go like, oh, there's yet another IAM project, oh, whatever, and you'll lose the enthusiasm within your organization to help you work out the actual IAM projects one by one. From an organization and people perspective, you have to make sure that you know that there's going to be change. That's for sure. You never know what's coming. So mergers, acquisitions, and so on, they can disrupt your IAM services and functions. You have to make sure that you have the right people and that they have the time to be involved in the projects. And you need to be aware of the operational impact that implementing IAM can have. It's a chicken egg problem sometimes. You need to have a lot of people working on it to get it to work. But once it's working, it'll lessen the burden on them. From a process and data perspective, if your processes, current and future, are not well documented, it's very hard to implement automation of something that's badly documented, and that's basically what you're doing. When you're looking at safeguarding data, not all data should be handled the same way. So you need to be sure that whenever you're developing systems that are working on safeguarding data, that you are able to distinguish between data types. The same goes actually for privileged accounts. Not all privileged accounts are as privileged, and so you need to sort of have a stack where you can decide where everything fits and have different ways of dealing with different types of data or privileged accounts or whatever. For data management challenges, you need to make sure that whatever you do, the accuracy and the completeness is there. Excuse me, kids were coming in. My apologies. That's a difficulty when you're working from home. Sorry. From a technology perspective, you have to make sure that selecting the product is not a strategy. Sounds pretty obvious, but again, it's something that a lot of customers actually sin against, because basically, if you try, you should try it. It's fun, and you sort of stick your hand out and say, I'm into identity and access management. I want to implement that in the coming years. Well, your door will be trampled by salespeople from integrators and vendors, all trying to claim that they have the ideal solution for you, and it's very easy to sort of get into that mode and just pick a product and think that you'll be set for life. Rushing to implement product, again, you need to make sure that you know what you're going to automate before you automate it, because otherwise it's like it wouldn't work completely, and you're building something that's probably not fit for the use. Well, buying into vendor rhetoric or integrator rhetoric, for that matter, that's what I already talked about. They'll try to, from their focus on selling licenses or selling mandates, they'll try to convince you to sign up with them as soon as possible, because then they know that they've won and they can continue with the next steps they have. You need to understand the scale and the impact of the technology. Again, if you know what you're working on and you know where you want to end up, you have a probable issue. And you need to make sure that you not only know your own roadmap, you also know the roadmap of the product you're probably buying, so that you can make sure that both of them are aligned in one way or another. So if you look at messaging and marketing, basically give value, give value, give value, and ask for the business. That's what people want to do, what salespeople want to do. And if you look at everything that's available, it's not even a complete list, but there's a lot of stuff there, and there's a lot of new stuff there, risk-based whatever. And meanwhile, it used to be risk-based access, but risk is built into everything. You've got identity analytics, you've got artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is basically also identity analytics, but in a different way. Integration into a lot of stuff. We've got for privileged identity management, which is also called privileged access security or privileged access management. So all different terms used by different vendors to actually point to the same thing. It can be difficult to find your way throughout all these different aspects of identity and access management and find out what you would actually need. Again, there's also different types of delivery modes, like on-prem, cloud, hybrid. Do you want a SaaS platform, PaaS, or managed platform? What's the difference? DevOps in delivery. There's a lot of messaging and a lot of terminology around, and not everybody's using the same terminology for the same thing. I've had in the past, about 7 or 8 years ago, an enterprise single sign-on vendor claiming that they were doing identity management, because if you would remove access to the enterprise single sign-on system, the user would no longer know their passwords and wouldn't be able to log into anything anymore. Which is true, so the access is blocked, hooray, but the accounts still exist. So it's not really identity management. I've had vendors claiming that their identity management system also did access management because they managed accesses, where an access to them was basically an entitlement. So just by misusing the access term, they named their system to be an identity and access management system while it was only identity management. So there's a lot of possible misguidance, not necessarily on purpose, but sometimes also by ignorance in messaging from vendors, from integrators, all trying to convince their customers or their potential customers to buy with them and not with the competition. Next to that, there's also information overload. If you look at the amount of information that's available and the way stories are told by vendors, by integrators, even by other customers on how they approach their IAM systems, how they failed or how they succeeded, how do you distinguish fact from fiction as a potential customer? As if you're looking at IAM, where to start and who to believe, that's difficult to find out. Also, what's relevant for you? How would you know if they show you a nice functionality? How would you know if it's relevant? And sometimes compare it with buying a car. If you look at the car that I want and the car that my wife wants, it's quite different. I want like the adaptive cruise control. My wife only drives the kids to school and goes for groceries, and she's unaware why she would need that. Same for heads-up display. She hates it. So the car that she would buy would be completely different from the car that I would buy, and it actually is. Lucky for me. But for identity and access management is the same thing. What of all those nice functionalities and features do you need, and why? And is it worth the money for you? Or will you just be buying a very expensive system where you will be using 25% of the capabilities? Again, pricing models, also something that's different from vendor to vendor. And if you write out an RFP, you get the answers back. You can see if you have for instance, a fixed Excel that they need to fill in, that a lot of vendors are struggling to be able to put their pricing model into the Excel that you came up with. So basically what they try to do, and then that's also very typical, is to be sort of different from the other ones, so that you would be comparing apples to pears, what they say in Dutch. I'm not sure what the English expression is actually, but it's hard to compare the different models to each other. And you know that your budget is relevant, so sort of knowing what the actual pricing model is all about and what the impact would be on your environment and how it's evolving is very relevant. Delivery models, do you want the cloud, do you want hybrid cloud, do you want on-prem, do you want it to be managed by your integrator, or do you want to have large support contracts to go with that, or are you going to build your own team? How reliable do you need it to be? Is basically just an identity management system that's not involved in your critical path, or do you want access management that is critical? So there's a lot of things to think about, and a lot of aspects that go with that that you should know about upfront before you go into buying something. So what is typically proposed to tackle the IAM problems describes, and there's one of my favorites is Poirot. And this is a quote from Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, actually. As you yourself have said, one of the travelers say, what other explanation can there be? It's when they're looking over a body, and Poirot stared straight ahead of him. That is what I ask myself, he said. That is what I never cease to ask myself. And you should also never cease to ask yourself, am I doing the correct things? Am I still on track? Am I going into the right direction? So this is why I use this quote. So what do we have? We have a proven implementation methodology. Oh, that's what every integrator has one, and they're all different. And again, they're all alike. And at least they show that the party you're getting yourself involved with has experience in IAM context, because they've seen it's difficult and they've tried to work out something that helps them to manage IAM projects. Program and project management methodologies, again, there's a lot of those around, and basically it's just another way of getting projects and programs under control, and you do need those. It's the only way to get to be successful. Change management methodology, very important, because identity and access management goes with a lot of change, and you need to make sure that everybody within your environment is aware of those changes and is actually managed into coping with change. And coping with change is something that people don't necessarily like to do. We like to keep things as they are. And when change heads our way, we try to sort of escape from that. But that's why the proper change management is necessary to keep your environment and your company going into the right direction. But the most important one, and the one I want to put emphasis on, is communication. And communication, it's from inception through delivery to the continuous improvement and adaptation of your IAM platform. You need to communicate. And actually, if you look at the implementation methodologies, typically communication would be a very important point in that. The same with project and program management. Communication, very important. And change management, it's basically about communication. So communication is the most important part for me. And you have that from an internal perspective and from an external perspective. From an internal perspective, you need to define a mandate. You need to know who your stakeholders are and what the expectations are that you're going to set. So you need to communicate about what are the goals, what means do you get, how do you want to prioritize, who needs to be involved, what is the impact they can have. That's all important. You need to define an owner for your IAM environment and communicate about that. And that's actually quite important, because I've seen a lot of companies struggle with going into an IAM journey and building IAM solutions, and then struggling with, but who's the actual owner, and who's going to make sure that these systems survive and evolve. And basically, if it's pure than IT, where it ends up, that they'll keep it running, but they're probably not able to make it evolve in a proper way. It should end up in the security office or similar. And that's basically what I've helped a lot of companies do, is to define what the team should look like and where it should end up. And that's not always the same for every company. It has to do with the nature they have. It has to do with the legacy they have. It has to do with the organization and how it's structured. You have to define a communication plan throughout your project. You need to make sure that all layers are involved and that they're kept informed. You need to communicate on successes, which is easy, but also on failures. You need to be very, very honest about it. It needs to be on a regular basis. You might compare it to the Security Council Belgium has now. It's almost right what they're doing, but they should either or be more focused on the timing of their communication than what they're now. So basically, you need to make sure that every week, for instance, you have a communication out saying what went well, what went wrong, what the next steps are, where you're going, how you're aligned to what you set out to do at the beginning, and so on. And you need to make sure that you use different channels so that you reach everybody the correct way. You need to prepare for change. You need to communicate openly on changes to be expected and how to deal with them. You need to make sure that people know what they're heading for, what they need to do. And depending on the layer within your organization, that communication can be fairly easy, or you can really have the need to have some more guidance for some types of people that are less IT savvy and are more or less scared by what's heading towards them. And you need to be able to track and report on progress. You need to know if you're reaching your goals. And this is actually very important because you can start off with something, with an idea and a well-defined project. But you need to remember that you're shooting a moving target. So if your target's moving, you need to check at the regular intervals if you're still going the correct way for hitting the target and not getting astray somewhere. On the external part, you need to be sure that you take the lead. That means from going to vendors or integrators and asking them, can you help me, or what can you do for me, is you have to make sure that you know what you want, and then you go to your vendor or your integrator and you ask them, can you do this for me? Can you sell me something that does this, exactly this? And I don't care about everything else, just basically what I need or what I tell you that I need. You need to be able to give insight in the nature of your environment. If you're going to a vendor or an integrator and you want them to do a project for you, you need to make sure that they're very aware of what makes your organization tick, that they know if it's a very bureaucratic environment where they need to take time to go through a lot of documentation processes, for instance, or if they know that you're like a very swift and agile environment, then they know they can move faster and they can adapt their offering to what you need. You need to provide clear expectations. You need to know where you want to go. You need to define where you want to go. You need to define clearly what you expect from whomever is helping you out. And you want to prevent external parties from influencing your plans and needs based on whatever extra nice features they might have or nice services they could deliver. You need to be very clear about what you want and what expectations you have from your vendors or your integrators. And you need to provide clear communication means. It means you want to be in the lead of all communication, and whenever your vendor or your integrator needs a way to communicate within your organization, you need to give them the proper means that you want them to use. And you also want to, whatever they need to communicate with you, for instance, during an RFP, you want to make sure that you provide them the exact template of how you want them to answer, so you're able to compare whatever answers you get. So communication is important, and you have you need to find the balance between what the vendor wants, what the integrator wants, and what you want. So how do you reach that? So what is the silver bullet? There's never a silver bullet, or the magic. It's not really magic, but the solution is based on starting by taking a step back. This is another nice Nice quote. If you aren't moving forward, you're moving backwards unless the regression is to serve progress. And that's basically what we want to do. We want to take a step back to be able to move ahead. Somehow. So why do you want to take a step back? It doesn't matter in what phase of your IAM project you are, if you are starting or in the middle of it, or you're running your solutions and evolving them through time. You need to spend some time and effort into looking into how your efforts and your spending is in line with the needs and priorities that you have, and if they're still in line with your changing environment, with your moving target you're aiming for. So taking a step back and evaluating how you're doing sort of keeps you focused on your targets and on your goals. What does that bring to you? You have, if you take that step back and assess what you're doing, you get a clear overview of your needs, risks, and costs, and you make sure that they're still up to date. You have the ability to align your IAM, whatever you're building or running, with your changing environments. You can save costs basically by making correct decisions and well-informed decisions, because that's the most important part. It's being well-informed. You can have a clear overview of the roadmap you have and the budgets you need. And that's actually quite important. If you have a stakeholders meeting and they're giving you a lot of money, a lot of budget, and you're not able to show them where you're heading and if they're still on track, then you might lose whatever you got. That's specifically important in the beginning. You have all the information you need for assessing vendor and integrator offerings in a uniform way. You have something a checklist to use when you're looking at offerings that you get in, once you have your needs all defined. So how do you assess your IAM landscapes? What steps and deliverables should you be working on? You need to define the scope of your assessment. Depending on where you are at, it can be the full scope. Anything to do with identity and access management, we're starting off, we need to know whatever we want to do. Or it can be a partial scope. You know that you're, for instance, going to focus on privileged account management, then you just focus the assessment on that part. It can be that you're working from scratch, you're at the beginning, or you might be reworking. So it can be an assessment throughout your project, for instance, to see if you're still on track. So the exact scope will depend on the purpose and the timing. You need to be able to define or redefine your stakeholders, or check the stakeholder list that you have, and plan the assessment, because they will be involved in answering your questions. And then you go and gather some information on the policies, the processes, the needs, current and future, the automation solutions that are already in place, and how they should evolve, or what gap there is with the needs that you have, and all the related risks, which is very important, because if you want to prioritize your needs into a proper roadmap, then risk is probably one of the easiest and most agreed on manners to prioritize. And once you've prioritized, you define your outcome, and that gives you a new charter basically to keep on working for the coming period. The outcome, what should it contain? It should contain all current and future needs for all relevant processes, policies, concepts, as defined within the scope that you set up. You need to have all the related risks and costs so that you can compare them and prioritize them. You prioritize those, and then depending on the purpose, you can have a list of possible scenarios that you can base your future endeavor on, or you can have a roadmap that you define, or you can have an RFI or RFQ document that you prepare, or you can prepare a progress map or a program adjustment that you need to report to your stakeholders, for instance. So to sum it up, the approach that we suggest by regularly assessing what you're doing, it brings you some benefits. On the internal part, to be able to succeed in IAM, you need a proper mandate. It means You need to get the mandate to actually implement it, to push through the change that you need, to get all the effort and work that needs to be done by different departments to get the buy-in of those. And that clear upper management support should be sustained by clear communication on your successes, your failures, and your progress. You need to be able to show and communicate on the steps you've taken and the successes you've had, and that'll keep them giving you the mandate and giving you the budget you need. You need to communicate properly to all layers that are involved, and the only way to do that is if you know where you are at and if you know what is coming. So the assessments help you in defining a clear road to where you're going, in defining the priorities, but also your ability to explain to people why something has had a bigger priority than something else. Even though they were looking forward to having some functionality, it might be postponed because something else was more urgent because of some priority and a budget that goes along with it. So you're able to explain that. You have an open and clear view on the progress, on the changes and the roadmap for all the layers involved, so that they actually are never wondering what you're doing with the quite substantial budgets that you need. And you need to report and communicate on the budget and the efforts and how it aligns with the expectations that you set in the beginning. The regular checks on progress help you to do that. And whenever you see that you should adjust or change the roadmap, or rearrange the order, because there's different priorities, that you are able to communicate clearly on that and to prove why you are doing the step or taking the steps you're taking. For the external part, for vendors and integrators, it's very important that you know what you need and why you need it, that the way you communicate on your needs is clear, it's prioritized, that it's risk-based, so that they know that you're prepared. You need to be able to, or it enables you to properly communicate with your vendors, and they'll notice when you present them with an RFQ, for instance, that has clearly prioritized risk-based requirements that are well described. They'll see and they'll feel that you're well prepared, and they'll actually also be able to give you a more correct and to the point answer, because it's not always the vendor that is trying to be vague. Sometimes they need to be vague because you didn't communicate properly on what your needs were actually. Same goes with integrators, not only in the beginning where you ask them to do estimates for a project you want to do, but also if they're doing a project and they want to, they have a question, or do you want to go left or right? There's different ways to what you described, which one is the way you want to go. Having a clear and correct view on your requirements and on your needs and on the priorities and the risks related to that will enable you to properly cross-check and give direction based on those insights that you have. And again, as I said, the more precise and clear your needs are, and the more precise and clear you're able to communicate about your needs, the easier it will be to compare the answers that you get from vendors and integrators with each other. So take a step back, assess and use your new insights to communicate properly with internal and external parties, and this will probably, I need to speak with two words always, avoid you and your organization to get stuck in that rat race to modern IAM that I tried to describe in the beginning. Are there any questions?
Well, in the first place, thank you very much, Sven, for this insightful talk. You've talked about rats, about elephants, about cars, and
and Voltaire. No, don't forget
and Voltaire. Yeah, and Voltaire, and then also a little bit of Agatha Christie.
Yes.
So great, very insightful. I think people definitely have a great shopping list of things when they need to go out and search for a new platform. and of course, hopefully also with your support in this case. I think it's, I raised the question to the participants what their main purpose is for identity and access management today. It's not really directly related to the rat race as such. I think it's important to understand definitely for them and also for other participants later on. And it seems to be that digital transformation is a major driver. So most attendees are indicating digital transformation is for me the reason to consider identity and access management. In that perspective, I think it's pretty hard to go out and find yourself in the perspective of your presentation, the vendor that's most suitable to you, because people and companies are considering at the same time how to do this digital transformation, what it means for them. They don't really know what it actually implies. They don't have any idea about the impact it actually can bring. They have some hopes and suspicions based upon others. But in this case, I think it's a bit of a question how you can organize such a rat race and how to basically steer that the best rat in this case would be the winner. So what would you recommend to those people?
Well, the digital transformation is in a way actually quite similar to identity and access management in the perspective that it's not completely clear to everybody where to start and how to do it. And there's a lot of messaging about it. There's a lot of companies that are focusing on providing solutions for the digital transformation, providing services for digital transformation. And actually have the same tension between the different parties that from one hand, as a customer, you're not really sure where you're going to end up and how you're going to be able to end there. And the vendors that are selling product or try to sell product and try to sell different tools that can help you, and integrators that are trying to help you get those tools into place to be able to digitally transform what you're doing. So basically this is it's the same type of rat race, and identity and access management will only be a part of it. And it's probably fair to say that the same approach would hold for going into digital transformation as this for going into identity and access management. It's also, again, a moving target that you're shooting at. And to be able to know exactly how you're going to get there is to be well informed, and being well informed means first taking the proper time to analyze what it is exactly that you want to do, how you can achieve that, what are the different solutions that are around, and how they might fit into your environment, the nature of your environment, and communicate well about it. So it's basically, the approach can be used not only for IAM, because it's very obvious that it's been an issue in IAM projects, but it's actually also the same approach can be used for digital transformation or for any other new technology that pops up and that you want to try to integrate in your environment.
So it's basically any type of technology implementation that impacts the whole of the organization in the end.
Yes, and where you have a sort of a moving target, because you never know where you're going to end up. And it's also digital transformation, again, is a never-ending story, because you start doing it and then you never know where it's going to end. So it's a similar transition where you start on a journey and you know that it's something that will be will take a continuous effort and a continuous changing process. It's not a small project that you start and you end and you say, here's the product done. It's like, here's the environment and now we're going to let it evolve over time. And IAM or digital transformation are similar in that perspective, as is an ERP system for that matter.
A short question to finalize, because it's ending 10 a.m. The current situation that we are having with COVID-19 and the situation where we're heading to in the next couple of weeks, probably the new normal. How would you consider that identity and access management would be of support to those organizations trying to cope with, let's say, the new normal now?
Well, an identity and access management journey is not something you get done within a few months. So if you're not already working on it and you don't already have an IAM system available, then probably it's not not easy to envision a company like that having the means or the opportunity IAM access. For those companies that do have identity and access management, they will notice that the automation that's behind it will actually help them to, in a secure way, provide
So it seems.
and it will not be of any service to you.
Right. It seems that the connection is blurring a bit every once in a while. Okay, yeah, I think basically the point there was with the current crisis, of course, companies are directed to go digital. They don't have any choices anymore. So it actually can be the right moment and the right time to at least start considering, because they will be faced with it in any case to log on to many systems, many applications, and so the identity and access will be the very component that they will be faced with in the very first moment.
It's probably because it's driven from digital transformation, which will be the new normal.
Yeah, correct.
Work more remotely, digitally, and everything that goes with that needs the support and the automation of an identity and access management environment with all the tweets and twerks and whatever you want.
Right, indeed. Okay, well, thank you in any case very much, Sven, to enlighten us and to share your expertise and experiences with us. Let me quickly finalize by just pointing out that we have another couple of webinars coming up later on today. Probably also important in this respect, namely on cookie consent management and how to find your way in the labyrinth of the GDPR and the e-privacy regulation. So after the rat race of this morning, we'll just continue putting the rats into the labyrinth, and hopefully they'll be able to find their route and their way out of there. So thanks in any case, again, Sven, sharing your best practices and your perspectives. We've learned a lot in terms of how to approach this, what to look out for, shopping lists of things to see, and especially the most important one, communication in the end. So, all right. We're looking forward to seeing you again and the rest of our partners in our next Identity and Access Management webinar next week, Thursday. Have a nice day, everybody, and you too. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.